My name's Dan Brogan. I'm the owner and founder of 5280 Magazine, and I want to welcome you and thank you for coming out. It's always great when you have people that are concerned about the city and want to be involved. So with me is Natasha Gardner. Natasha is a senior editor at 5280. Our other guest needs no introduction. He is the mayor of the city and county of Denver, Michael Hancock. So please welcome him. Thank you. So this is a part of a series of events that we've been working on with the mayor's office, and when we sat down to plan what we wanted to do in 2016, you know, we both threw back and forth some lists of topics that we might talk about, and the topic that was at darn near the top of both of our lists is affordable housing. That's something that pretty much everybody in town is talking about and wrestling with these days. So I think it was a real appropriate one to start off 2016 with. So affordable housing is one of those things that a lot of people talk about, but the fact of the matter is we don't always know exactly what it means. There are very precise political, legal definitions of affordable housing, and then there's the definition that a lot of us, just regular folks, are using. So I think we wanted to start it by giving you a chance to kind of talk about how you define it and sort of briefly what you see the challenges are.
First of all, Daniel, let me, now this has gone down a little better. Yeah. This was the most powerful one. First of all, let me thank everyone for being here. Let me thank Daniel and Natasha, 5280, for doing this event again. I think we had a very good discussion the first time. I was able to sit with Daniel to do a series with 5280. And to call to arms as well, let me thank the ownership for hosting this. This is a real treat. Please give everyone a applause. That's amazing. And if I can just thank our community affairs team and our housing division for pulling this off, as well as our Channel 8 team and our facilities management team who did all the setup for us to be here today. This is, when it comes to affordable housing, at least the discussion of affordable housing, I want to be very clear so that you understand that I believe there is no more important issue, not only here in Denver, but now across the nation, as we are seeing more and more people move to our cities, than the issue of affordable housing. And Denver, what Denver is facing is on a little different scale than most cities because we are growing so fast. It's a city that's in demand. But cities are experiencing similar challenges that we are challenged with here in the city of Denver, just at a different level. When you ask how I define affordable housing, what we try to do is to keep the burden that people carry with regards to their housing cost, meaning their rent or mortgage plus utilities, at below 30% of their take home. And when someone becomes higher than that, then they become what we call rent burden. And so our goal is to figure out, based on what they are bringing home, to keep that rent somewhere within that range of 60% or below, so that they can have that space to do the other things necessary to have a sustainable, comfortable way of life and to continue to take care of some of their basic needs.
And of course, there's official designation of affordable housing too, which is what people more commonly think of as Section 8, which has also been a priority of your administration. Can you speak to that a little bit?
In terms of Section 8? Well, the whole apparatus of affordable housing is our partnership, and I mean, it's our ability to work with outside stakeholders. And let me not go a step further without introducing Rick Padilla, who's our Director of Housing for the City and County of Denver. I apologize for As you all know, with Denver Housing Authority as our main housing authority for affordability and our low-income housing in the City of Denver, they actually implemented Section 8 certificate or voucher program as we know it. They have a waiting list, and I think Rick can vouch for the fact that there's a waiting list for folks who will wait for months, if not years, to get on or to get Section 8 housing. The challenge, of course, is not only access to the voucher, which are limited because we are seeing cuts in housing, federal spending on housing, dramatic cuts over the last decade, but the availability of housing and landlords who are willing to rent to those who have Section 8 voucher, because in today's market, they can get whatever they want for their units. And so there's a challenge. So yes, we are focused on working with landlords through the mayor's, Metro Denver Caucus of Mayors. We have come together, we have the landlord finding program where each city put up money to incentivize landlords to rent to those who are carrying vouchers.
So tonight we'll be talking about both pretty interchangeably because in reality that's how we live in this city. They're both issues coming together. As I was driving over here today, I saw a sign. I actually saw several signs for jobs wanted. One including a $9.95 per hour job as a cashier, and I was thinking about that and trying to calculate what that is for an annual wage, and that's going to be really hard to live in this city. I think Dan has some interesting perspectives as a business owner, too, of how that affects employees. I'd like to sort of delve into that now. Sure.
Yeah, and we'll definitely come back to the Section 8 because in some ways that's the most critical aspect of this issue, and we'll definitely come back to that. What we're seeing as a business is a couple of things. First, 5280 is fortunate to be in a thriving city like this, and we've had some success, and because of that, when we have job openings, we get applicants from literally all over the country who want to come to Denver. They want to work for our magazine. But we're seeing that moment where we think we've got a good candidate, and they actually come out and look around, and they start looking at, well, what's it going to cost to live here? And there is that come to Jesus moment of, I don't know if I can make this work. And I'm sure you're hearing that from other businesses. The other end of it that we've noticed is we have a lot of younger employees, and we have noticed in the last few years that we're seeing a serious decline in the number of employees who are participating in our 401k program. And that's not because the stereotype of young people who don't think about the future. It's because after they've paid their rent, there's nothing left over to put in that 401k. And that's something that I think is going to have long-term implications for people that live here in Denver. Right. Are you hearing that from other businesses?
Oh, without question. I'm seeing it with a lot of my with all of my employees, but certainly with younger employees who come to work in the mayor's office and in our departments and divisions across the city where they're simply saying we can't afford to live in the city. And it's heartbreaking because you want them to live in the city. And that's why we're working hard to do some of the things that we are doing in the city to try to produce as quickly as we can some of the affordable housing units for a lot of those workers who are, who are burdened again and who need to have opportunities. Listen, we don't want this to be a city that people can work here but they can't live here. And once that happens, then we're not the Denver that we believe that we are. We want this to be an inclusive city. We want to make sure that people who choose to live, who work here, can choose to live here if they so desire. And we want them to live here. It makes no sense for me to talk all over the world about how cool it is for Denver to recruit millennials, but yet when they get here, they realize they can't afford their apartment or the conditions in which they're accustomed to living. So we've got to work, and that's why these discussions are so important, so people understand what we're doing in the city to begin to bridge that gap between those who have a desire and affordability for people to live here.
So in many ways, our marketing campaign is going great. I mean, everyone wants to come here and move. The Go West young man is truly alive today. Right. So what can we do to get employers to ramp up their game, to bring wages up to something that would work with this?
Well, I think 3 years ago, and I was a part of this conversation with the President of the United States and his team, as well as several other mayors. We sat in a room and we talked about what's the biggest challenge facing our cities and, of course, this nation. And the one thing we all agreed on is that the lack of increase in wages over the last decade in this country is going to disproportionately hurt everyone's ability to, one, take care of their families and live where they want to live. And so if we are going to make an impact, we've got to start seeing the wealth in this nation begin to spread. And what we mean by that is not necessarily what we mean by that is that we need to make sure that wages are keeping pace with the cost of living in this nation. And right now it's not happening. Where cost of living is going like this in many cities like Denver, wages have remained like this. Now what we're seeing in Denver, we are beginning to see a little year-over-year increase in wages and take-home pay, but not at a rate that's equal to or comparable to the cost of living. So we've got to get that caught up, and employers are the key to that. As more and more people are coming, as more and more people are investing in the city and spending money in the city, we need to make sure that we're able to pay the employees who are making it happen. And so in our conversations, when we talk to employers who are looking at Denver, we want to know what your wages are. What are you paying people? Because as a city, we want to be partnered with those who have the same values we have, and that is that we are properly compensating people who want to live in our city.
On the flip side of that, we were talking about sort of a younger generation. A question from someone in the audience is, what are we doing to look at the aging population in Denver? Somebody who, the average rent is around $1,300 a month. For somebody who maybe is retired, that was perhaps more than they made after quite a few months when they first started their career. So how do we address that population?
So it's a complex answer to that because actually Denver, age-wise, is becoming younger. Because of the influx of younger generation or millennial generation moving to the city and younger families who are moving to the city. But we're also, and it's going to sound like a contradiction, but not at the rate in which millennials and young families are moving in, we're also a magnet for the baby boomers who are moving in to retire. Interesting thing about baby boomers, or at least the older generation, is when we go to fix fees and taxes, we think about those who may be income burdened as well as our seniors who are on fixed income. So to your point, they're top of mind when it comes to what is the burden of fees and taxes we're putting on our people. How do we help those who may be challenged because they don't have a way to make additional income, or they are low income, they're in low wage jobs. And so we think about them constantly, and we try to check ourselves to make sure that we're not overburdening other folks. But interestingly enough, those who are fixed wages are more burdened by the taxation or the increase in values in their properties than they are by trying to rent something of higher wage. Not to say that some of them aren't, but I'm saying that on the aggregate, they're more impacted by, because values in my neighborhood have gone up, now I got to pay higher property taxes. Sure. That's where we have a bigger problem with them, and that's where we have senior rebates available to seniors to help them with the property tax increase in the state of Colorado, particularly here in Denver.
Interesting.
So what do we do about the wage thing? I mean, is that something that you simply have to let the free market handle, or is there something that the city can actually do to get guys like us to pay people more?
It's mostly, yeah.
God forbid.
Paying your people better.
Try it.
Yeah. I'll tell you the reality, there's very little that the city can do. We can, as those companies come to us in terms of moving to our city and they want to be our partner, we can stress the importance of, and we really focus on companies that are bringing higher paying, wage paying jobs to the city. But the market is pretty much determinant on what people are paying their employees. But as we continue to talk with employers and we try to feed them information, most of them know the economic situation. Most of them want their employees not to be overburdened financially. They also don't want their employees stuck in congestion and on roads because they got to travel extraordinary amount of miles to get to work. It hurts their productivity. It hurts their retention. They recognize that. And so we can work with them, or at least be mindful of the taxation and the fees and the regulation to keep those costs down. But ultimately, it's the employer and it's the market that determines what they pay their employees.
Well, and you mentioned the market, and that segues into our next topic, which is, as much as anybody would like, you can't just wave a wand and have more housing. There's a process, and it takes time, and it's not overnight. And it's funny for a lot of us when we see so much new construction up and down this street, we see so many cranes over downtown, and yet somehow, other than maybe high-end housing, the inventory is not keeping up. What things can the city do? And maybe that's where we start to get into the Section 8 thing, but we're also talking about more moderate level incomes too. What can the city do to help that process along, especially given that interest rates just went up, Sure. People are a little shaky about the economy right now? How much can the city do?
Well, we can have a plan. In our Denver plan that I convened a commission 3 years ago, they completed the plan 18 months ago. And we actually published it and we're following the plan. So one is to have a Denver plan, and the focus on affordable housing is top of mind. Secondly, in 2013, as part of my State of City address, I challenged the private sector community and the nonprofit housing development community, what I call 3x5. Let's create 3,000 or develop 3,000 new units in the next 5 years. That was about 2.5 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, when we did that. And I'll tell you that we out of that program created some 1,400 units. We have 1,200 in the pipeline today, and so we're going to exceed that target as we go forward. The third thing we've done, Danny, to your question is, we create the revolving loan fund. So for the first 2 years of my administration, second and third year of my administration, I committed $3 million of general fund each year. So we had $6 million of corpus. The state came in with $3 million to help with the revolving loan fund, and we just recently got $1 million from Colorado Housing Finance Authority. And so now we have a $10 million corpus, and we will use those dollars to partner with the private sector and the nonprofit development community to develop housing. So we're making loans. This is a revolving loan fund. So as they pay us back, that money continues to circulate, and we'll continue to push it out to partner with the private sector. The fourth thing that we're doing is we went and did some things with our ordinances, the preservation ordinance, those housing units we've already invested in. As they come up in terms of their term of affordability, we now have an ordinance in the city of Denver that we get first right of refusal. It notifies that it's expiring, and we get the first right of refusal to preserve the affordability of those units in the marketplace so that we don't lose them. And so the city can use some of these dollars to go in, buy them, and keep them affordable and make sure they stay in the market in that way. The other thing that I'll mention to you is that in 2017, you're going to see the city step up in a big way. We're going to begin committing $15 billion a year toward affordable housing. And the ideal is, again, is to partner with the community that's developing, preserving, and making available affordable housing in the marketplace. This is a tremendous commitment for a community of our size. But our goal is to continue to provide affordable housing and put our money where our mouth is. And then finally, you saw us go in and revamp the inclusionary housing ordinance that we all know about. And as a result of some of the cleanup that we and some of the strengthening of the inclusionary housing ordinance, we were able to, for example, have affordable housing around Union Station. How cool is that? In the hottest destination in the city today, that we have affordable housing units being developed. And we can thank the inclusionary housing ordinance for that. But the bottom line is we have a couple thousand units underdeveloped right now because of the efforts that this administration has taken for affordable housing, and we're not done yet. Because when that $15 million begins to roll in, we're going to be able to do more and deploy more resources out into the marketplace.
So a lot of points there. We're going to drill down on a few of them. Starting maybe in reverse order, with the inclusionary housing ordinance, we've heard often that the fees that a developer could pay to get out of that aren't high enough. They aren't punitive enough. Would you consider raising that amount?
We committed to always evaluating what we're doing with regards to those units. But you got to understand, you've got government entering into a private sector activity, okay? And the fees are not meant to, they're meant to cover the equivalent of the units that we're trying to develop based on the number that of the developer. It's a crazy formula, right? So every 30, it's one, honey? For every 30? 10%. 10%. So 3 units for starting with 30 units. So the reality is we're trying to cover that cost so we can deploy it out into the marketplace. But that's why we're bringing these other tools to bear so we can partner with those resources, strengthen those resources, and put them out in the marketplace to do more than what even they would have covered if they had built them themselves.
But there are other cities that have higher rates that have survived. So that
we don't believe that it has to be all on the developer side. And I'll tell you, my administration does not believe that. It cannot be just a one-sided formula. This has to be a public-private partnership going forward, and that's why we're not trying to overburden the development community. They're playing their role. They have their rules and their laws now. The public also has to show up, and other portions of the private sector have to show up. The third sector, the nonprofit community, has a role to play. If you're going to be a development organization, we want to partner with you. So we believe it's not just one player or stakeholders responsible. We're all responsible for making sure that we develop affordable housing in the marketplace.
And as you mentioned, there's been some really good improvements in the last few years, and particularly upcoming. I've toured some of those construction sites. I've seen some of those buildings going up. They're pretty nice establishments, not just buildings that are being built. They're truly nice buildings. At the same time, though, we are having a crisis with Section 8 housing or affordable housing that's getting renewed. And these are landlords that agreed to these terms in a different economic market. I can understand why they can see their contract coming up and saying, yeah, you know what, I'd rather rent this out at full price. What can we better do to get those people to renew?
It's a very difficult challenge, and I will tell you that, it's the number one complaint or concern is articulated to me when I'm out in the community from people who have vouchers and say, I have nowhere to go. And it breaks your heart. And some of these folks I know personally. It's difficult. Like I said, I joined with other mayors to pull together some money to try to incentivize the landlords. In other words, we'll pay you to do this, to keep doing it. It's just one of those difficult things of mixing the public need with the private enterprise and desires of profitability that, you know, you can go to a market and do a much better deal than to stay here. We're going to continue to work with landlords as best we can and to find those landlords and incentivize them as best we can to continue to accept the vouchers and help us with helping people access affordable, decent housing.
So building on this sort of kaleidoscope of options that you presented here. In addition, it seems like we need a variety of options to solve the issue. Some things that came up in the questions are how could we better use land trusts? How could we better use backfill within our city? You know, I've heard people talk about could we look at housing stock that was built in the 70s or 80s that with some improvements instead of tearing it down could become moderate housing in our city. How are you assessing sort of new strategies like that to address this issue?
Well, we're doing all those things. In fact, you know, if you look at a project at 48th and Race where, you know, it's the Globeville area, Swansea area where we're building the National Western Center, we went in and through the leadership of our Office of Economic Development actually purchased, 6 acres of land to bank it for affordable housing. Because we do believe that we need to make sure that people who are living in the area can stay in that area. We're going to ultimately spin it off into a project for affordable housing. And so let's go. So the key is to be very intentional with your efforts. And here's the situation with housing in Denver. This is a very basic economic issue. It's very basic. You have higher demand and you have supply. You've got people moving in at a rate that is blowing everyone's mind across this country. There are a few markets in the nation that are experiencing what Denver is experiencing. Washington, D.C., Austin, Texas, to some extent Dallas, Texas, and every one of us are working to keep up with this. The reality is if you want to look at housing stock, they're already occupied. I mean, the existing housing stock is occupied. If it wasn't occupied, we wouldn't have this problem. And so whether it's 1970 housing or 1990 housing, you can't get to it. Here's the other thing that we forget that we're dealing with. Not only we're in demand, but what happened in the 2008? Recession. What led us to the recession?
Wall Street.
Besides the greed of Wall Street,
You got blamed now. One guy in North Carolina.
besides the greed of Wall Street, but the housing market is what led us into. I mean, it was the bonding and the financing of the housing market. It crashed. Unfortunately, a lot of people were foreclosed on. At one point, the city of Denver, parts of Denver led the nation in foreclosures. And the reality is now you've got those folks who are foreclosed on moving into your rental market. Those who are traditional renters are now squeezed because you have a higher demand than you have supply. And the housing market that was now vacated, you have folks who took advantage of the foreclosure market and purchased at the right time. So you got people living in housing where they got some great deals on it. So the reality is that the housing market there's no vacancy. And now you have to build to accommodate those who are moving into the city because there's nowhere for them to go. And that's what we're trying to keep up with, and it's constantly moving.
Well, and you mentioned the recession, and that had another impact in that, you know, things were great in Denver, people were moving here. Suddenly the recession happens, and the developers hit the brakes. And so they're not building for a couple of years. And again, these projects, you can't just start them from scratch. Right. They take time to ramp up. So now that they're back in the game, they're understandably trying to recoup those losses, and so they're going for the high-end stuff.
Well, it's not only that. Let's also remember you have the construction defects issue that is forbidding really development of multifamily affordable housing. In 2007, startups of multifamily housing for sale, condos, they accounted for 25% of our market. Today, it's less than 4%. It's like 3.4%. That law in the state of Colorado has created a chill across our state. And it's unfortunate because now we have one of the greatest opportunities in the history of the state to, particularly the metro area, to create affordable housing, particularly around transit with fast tracks. 21 stops in Denver alone, and we can't do for sale. If you go to, for example, I-25 in Bellevue, where you see hundreds of units that are now newly constructed, ask me how many are for sale. 0, because they can't. The developers had to sign a covenant and say they wouldn't convert them to for sale for 10 years because of the construction defect law. The reality is that we have to demand in the state of Colorado, our legislature, to change that law so that our developers can find a more favorable market to build affordable, for-sale, multifamily projects around our transit.
But related to that, so going back to 2008, 2009, 2010, you as the mayor, understandably, had to get development going again.
Yes.
And there are people who would say that in order to be friendly to those developers, you were, I don't want to put this in a polite way, but you're a smart politician. You've heard people with this criticism that you were so willing to give developers anything they wanted that now it is tough to turn around and say, well, no, now we need to go back to more normal rules. Is that a fair?
No, I'm not sure. What do we give them? What do we give them? I mean, at the end of the day, we have incentivized affordable housing. We've gone in and we've maybe partnered with employers to bring jobs to the city so that folks can get livable wages. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we are not engaging in any activity through the city that no other city around this country, that any other city around this country is not engaging in. When we go out and compete for the Panasonics and the Davidas of the world, we are running into Dallas. We're running into Portland. They'll tell you your competitors are X, Y, and Z. They have gone all over the country looking for where they're going to land, and Denver's one of the places they're looking at. And why they're coming? Because we have young, talented, educated workforce. And so the jobs are following where the people are wanting to move. And so what we're doing is creating the opportunity for them to come here so that people who want to live in our city now have the jobs to allow them to take care of their families.
And I get that it's a balancing act,
Sure.
but, as we mentioned earlier, we could raise the fees for developers that want to end run the requirements on having.
Finish your sentence.
Well, I think you know what I'm asking.
No, I don't know what you're asking.
Well,
what fees?
The fees when they end run the include. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, and again, that's a philosophical deal. I mean, it's not like you're never going to recoup the money necessary to meet your goals, from the developers to meet your goals around affordable housing. And to approach it just from one side of the equation, it's not going to allow, I mean, you name a city that they're meeting their goals because there's demand based on inclusionary, I mean, using just the inclusionary housing tool. I don't know a city, and we've looked at all of this practices. Now, they may charge higher fees, but are they meeting the demand with their housing?
I'd have to look into that more, but that's my job. I can do that.
I don't know. So, I mean, and I'll tell you, I've been to Portland, I've been to Seattle. And Seattle not only does inclusionary housing, but they also have dedicated mill levy for their housing. And you walk around Seattle, you still see the same challenges around housing that we have here in Denver. So what we decided to do was to take a more comprehensive approach. It's not just the private sector. It's got to be yes government, yes the third sector, the nonprofit development community that has to step up. And so we're not giving everything to the development community because we can't. We don't have it to give. At the end of the day, we're saying we're going to all be in this together. So let's figure out this, and that's why we're beginning to see projects happen throughout the city of Denver. I'm sorry, Rick.
No, Mr. Mayor, I just had that under the IHO, under the revised ordinance of the IHO, we did raise the fees to developers this year. Under the Nexus study that we currently have underway, we're looking at impact fees beyond those that are just building 30 or more for sale units.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's the impact fees that you would see.
A question that just came in, which I think is an interesting offshoot of this, at least in my head, hopefully it is to everyone else. You've talked a lot about making housing affordable for young people, but what about families who have lived here for generations and have been pushed out? I find this to be very interesting because part of the beauty of Denver is that single house with a backyard, ability to go up to mountains. Part of what Denver is maybe changing as we become more dense. How do we both preserve some of our historic neighborhoods that are so vital to the history of this city, but also the future, and also make sure that our families that have helped build this city are able to stay here?
Well, here's the reality. Most of the emphasis around our housing program, and the Office of Economic Development will tell you this, we make greater impact focusing on the working families. So workforce housing is what we call it. And that's really where most of where do they fall on the median scale?
60 to 80%.
60 to 80%. That's where most of our emphasis is placed. And so it is the working families. It is those who have income that quite frankly allow them to to have decent housing, but simply don't have the inventory in which to access. And that's why we're working so hard to fulfill that opportunity for those families here. So that's where our emphasis are focused on. I mean, most people will think that you're really focused on the lowest wage earners of the community. And quite, that's not where we are. I mean, we have partners who focus on that. We work with them. But at the end of the day, the bulk of our community is focused right there in that workforce housing community. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just add to that, the mayor is absolutely correct. If you look at our production numbers, we're really looking at not only an issue of job creation, it's an issue of job retention. And the revolving loan fund that we spoke of is really targeted towards workforce housing at 60% below area median income. So that's a large emphasis of our non-federal dollars that we're trying to put into retained housing. As a lifelong Denverite, I don't think we're losing the character of our community. We're preserving the character of our neighborhoods.
That's a good point, because Natasha, your question was also about neighborhoods. And we are but a city of neighborhoods. I mean, but for the neighborhoods, you don't have a city of Denver. And in maintaining, and the cost of living is also related to your ability around taxation, around fees. And I can just tell you, that's not just my administration, but, Hickenlooper's administration, Wellington's administration, Federico Pena's administration, all focus on making sure that we remain one of the most competitive cities when it comes to the cost of living based on the taxes that you pay in the city of Denver. And I think that's very important for us to remember when we talk about our seniors, when we talk about new families or working families. We can talk about the cost of getting in that unit, but if they're overburdened by taxation, let me tell you what the appointee that I brought in from outside of Colorado told me. He was blown away by two things. He said, first of all, I looked at my tax bill and I kind of snickered. He said, I was blown away by how low the property taxes are in the city. And then he said, I got my utility bill. He said, the utility bill that I pay here in Denver is a quarter of what I would pay where I came from. And so people don't realize that we're one of the lowest taxed states in the nation. And it's the leadership for the state and the city that has been focused on making sure that we maintain it. That's part of the equation as well.
Well, and one more on the thought of neighbors, because we're not a city alone. We are in the center of a vibrant metro area. And as we're experiencing massive growth, our neighbors are experiencing just as much. In fact, I think Broomfield grew faster than Denver in the 2013-2014 range. Now, in lots of ways, we're seeing something like fast tracks come to fruition in many ways in perfect timing. There's great transportation connections happening with the metro area. One thing that I've seen in these questions, and I've heard from other people, is a concern that we don't have that same sort of big picture plan for transportation within Denver, and that affects our housing market here. Can you speak to that?
Well, I'll say two things. One is, if you travel across this country, as I do often, and I was just in D.C. with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, mayors across this country are still baffled how Metro Denver recognized the fact that we were going to experience this growth boom, and in 2004 had the vision to pass fast tracks. Because that is part of the regional strategy to deal with the growing community and, of course, mobility. So it was tremendously visionary and smart in 2004 for not only the leadership, but for the people, the voters of this region, to say, let's do fast tracks. Secondly, I do have a mobility task force that right now is completing. I just had a briefing on it today. A report on how we are going to move people more efficiently around the city as we continue to grow. And this growth was not something that we, at this rate, could have planned for. But now that it's here, we must recognize that we have to develop complete streets. No longer is it just about automobiles, it's also about bicycles, it's about pedestrians. And that's the only way we're going to avoid the kind of congestion that runs people to other parts of the country, or moving people to our city and away from those other parts of the country. And so the reality is that, yes, you must have a plan. My mobility plan will be published or made public sometime this year. We're doing executing extraordinary partnerships around the issue of mobility with Panasonic, with other major corporations, to determine how we create more complete streets in the city of Denver, encourage people who are in the downtown area, who live in downtown area but don't, and work in downtown area but do drive, quite frankly, neighboring communities, and how they use alternative transportation modes to do that, to help alleviate the congestion that we're seeing. So those are the things that we're doing, as well as the work we're doing in Washington to try to bring more resources to expand roads and to create those opportunities.
As this conversation draws to an end, we'd be remiss not to talk about homelessness in this city. because obviously there are people who are affected by this the most. What can we do to help solve this issue in Denver?
There hasn't been a more complex issue that I've been involved in than affordable housing. When we came in, we were still within the framework of the 10-year plan to end homelessness. Didn't take very long for us to look at the challenge and recognize that we're not going to end homelessness in 10 years. The recession had a lot to do with that, but at the end of the day, cities for decades have been working on the homelessness. We wanted to understand what the root causes of homelessness are in the city. And when you look at the fact that 40% of the people who we're dealing with in terms of our chronically homeless are dealing with some form of behavioral health challenge, as well as substance abuse, we're missing the boat when we talk about a voucher for a hotel. At the end of the day, these individuals need transitional housing that places them in a location with stability for at least 2 years while we wrap them with the necessary support services to help them put their lives back together and to address their issues of mental health and substance abuse. Until we do that, you're going to continue to see visually the challenges that are on our streets. The second one is what Daniel started with, and you have capitalized on well, and that is access to jobs, access to training, access to jobs, and access to opportunity. If we know that we got chronic homeless and that 40 to 60% of them are dealing with some form of behavioral health and substance abuse, then we can develop a program. And that's what our social impact bond program that was just passed through City Council was all about last night. And we can take that $8 million and immediately begin to put people in stable housing for up to 2 years and get them the support they need. But we've got to address those who have episodic homelessness that we may never see, but who are moving from couch to couch or maybe from shelter to shelter because of something that's happened in their lives, a divorce, a death, parents have kicked them out of the house, whatever. That we got to move them to stability through job training and through access to opportunity and to sustainable wages. And so the point that I'm making here is that we are trying different forms. One, yes, partnerships with all of our third sector partners to help provide immediate shelter, emergency shelter, get people off the streets. But two, the service that we are implementing is groundbreaking through our social impact bonds. We studied 250 chronically homeless, for a couple years. And these 250 individuals cost the city of Denver $11 million a year. From going from 14,000 nights in jail, 1,000 arrests, 600 visits to emergency rooms, 2,400 visits to detox. From the street to detox, to the street to medical emergency room, back to the streets, to jail, back to the streets. We've got to break that cycle. And the only way we do that is by getting to the root cause of why they're in the cycle in the first place. Taking you to jail when you have a behavioral health problem is not the answer. But getting you some stability with housing and then wrapping you with those services, that has greater efficacy, and that's what we're driving toward. Not one silver bullet or idea solves a problem. We've got to bring a myriad of opportunities to the challenge, and that's what we're trying to do. That's a long way of answering your question, but I wanted to indicate to you that we have a better understanding of the problem we're trying to address here. And it's not just housing, it's a lot of other things with it.
These are all very complicated problems, and there are many people of good conscience that can have different opinions, but it's great to be able to have a chance to get together and discuss them. So thank you again for your time today, Mayor. We appreciate it.
Tasha, thank you.
Thanks very much.